nice nutritious lunch, not too much pasta or potatoes or all that bad stuff that'll send you to sleep. But welcome, and this afternoon we're going to walk you through a bit of a behind-the-scenes tour on one of our clients, Trinity Grammar School, and their journey on SharePoint over the last 3 to 4 years. So we've basically put together a bit of a story about how the project came together, the team that supported it, the solutions that were developed, and the outcomes that were achieved for the school. So some good information, and we're going to try and provide a little bit of context around some of the things that we did, some of the things that went well, some lessons learned for future, so that you as an audience can obviously benefit from that and hopefully avoid some of those pitfalls and traps that sometimes get you when you're running a project like this. So, quick little intros, I'll get these out of the way. First up, my name is Ben Creamer. I represent a company called Trinity, and we're a global SharePoint training and consulting firm, and have been in operation here in Australia for about 5 years, and globally coming up on 20 years now. So we're one of the only specific 100% focused SharePoint organisations. SharePoint, a bit more SharePoint is our motto. So we've got various offices around the globe. Obviously, you see the dots there on the screen, and it represents the team that delivers solutions to our clients on a daily basis. Now, for today's session, we are lucky enough to have a customer here with us as well, so that we can get a varied perspective on, obviously, what we've done as a solution provider, but also what the customer experienced and the customer's thoughts and feelings and those sort of things along the journey. So I'd like to welcome to the stage Mr. Evan Hughes, who's going to give us a perspective from the actual school and from the project team of the project.
Good afternoon. I'm the Director of ICT at Trinity, and that means that I'm responsible for looking after all the hardware and systems that support the teaching and learning and administration of the school. I've started life as a teacher a long time ago, and I've been involved in some form of IT administration. My whole teaching career has been developed into so that I wasn't able to teach because I didn't have the time to teach, and so I've just been in management since then. I was the internal team for the TNet project, our intranet, and on that team we also had initially a whole lot of teachers, and then we added a blend of administration staff as well as teaching staff at different levels and on different campuses. The school, Trinity Grammar School, is a big school. It's one of the largest in New South Wales in terms of an Anglican day school and boarding school, and it draws kids from country New South Wales and also internationally. And there are 2,060 students at the moment, and there's around 500 staff, and there's about 1,700 or 1,800 families associated with those students. So the client base is fairly large. Not really related to this, but we have around 3,000 end-user devices that the school currently owns and supports. It looks after the students and has Trinity as in the triangle, and looks at 3 aspects: mind, body and spirit, in terms of what it tries to do for students. And it's not just purely academic, but it encourages them to look at sporting and other interests, and also their spiritual well-being. We're a multi-campus school. We're based in Sydney. We have our main campus at Summerhill, our secondary campus at Strathfield, there's another small campus at Lewisham, and there's an outdoor educational field study centre that they're currently relocating. The project background. I guess we had an intranet which the IT department built many, many years ago out on an IIS server just for fun, and then that grew by need. The library wanted a place to put some information. There was resources that students needed, and so it sort of grew higgledy-piggledy, or there was no structure to that as it grew. And this journey that we're talking about today really started in 2010. That's when we sat down and said we really need to do this properly. Let's have a look at what we can do and how we can do it cohesively. At that stage, there was about 7 staff on the IT team and managing all the devices. We didn't have 3,000 end-user devices back then, but it was a busy life there. In that iOS-based intranet, the biggest user of that was the library, and they also managed textbooks, both in PDF format and also a range of executable files. So we had academic profile software and things like that, which worked at school when they were on school devices which had the components loaded to make them run, but they weren't accessible offline or from home for the students or the staff. There was no overall governance or development model for that, so it was fairly inconsistent, both in presentation. I remember our Strathfield campus had orange background for their internet pages, which hurt the eyes, and wasn't consistent with any of the publication department sort of protocols. And so no one was really monitoring that or taking a huge interest in that. We had network shares as for resources, repositories, and they were like a drive letter that was referenced. So again, that worked when you're logged on at school, but wasn't accessible from home or even from the other campus, because we had multi-campuses and different campuses had different network structures. So we want to try and pull that together. And collaboration, which was a key component. Initially, we had lofty goals of getting teachers to collaborate across the whole school, across faculties, across teaching levels. But we were coming from a very low starting point, where even within a faculty, a staff member would have their filing cabinet, which sometimes they would lock at the end of the day, and they wouldn't even share resources between their faculty, let alone with other faculties. So we quickly learned that that was a little bit too far to reach in one step, but we have collaboration has been a big win for us over the journey. Okay, the project goals. Okay, we wanted to have a single, cohesive-looking site and essentially managed site that we could put resources in. There were goals of having classroom sites where the teacher and the students for that class, we already knew who they were in our school information system, could have a space to collaborate, where a teacher says, okay, I've got a resource for you, it's in our class site, you go and have a look at that, you can access it, you can answer the questions, whatever they needed to do. We wanted to look like Trinity, use Trinity colours, Trinity fonts, Trinity things, so we had the publications team involved in branding and making that work, and we can control that with CSS style sheets, etc., which made it easy, there wasn't as much management. We wanted to distribute the ownership of file management, so each faculty has their own faculty team site, and they are responsible for managing the content and the structure and the look and the feel. And so that was another key goal, to just decentralise all that work. And search, improving search across the school so that people can find, they know that that resource exists somewhere, they remember a bit of the name or something about it, and so they can, with SharePoint search, it's actually been a big win for the teachers. Document management is another thing. Each staff member that worked on a document had their version, and then which version was the real version, which version is the one that should be filed and used in future years or the next time that course is run. With SharePoint, we're able to actually have versioning, so if they were making changes, they can go back and have a look if they needed to. So we're just trying to make sure that they're looking in one place for the resource rather than saying, well, I had it in my personal drive and I thought it was in the faculty network drive. So we're trying to eliminate that. And we started off having some teachers that had an interest and a bit of time allocation to go and do some research, have a look around. We looked at other schools. Abbottsley in Sydney is one school that was a leader in initially portal-based development, and then SharePoint. They had a team of SharePoint developers to actually back their development, and it's very impressive, and that has continued to this day, and that sets a benchmark for us in terms of what's possible with SharePoint in a school. some of our goals didn't quite match the direction that they were going, and we also didn't have the development resources in-house to actually achieve that. We also looked at corporate sites, just to have a look what intranets we could get views into, to see what they look like, structure, interfaces, ways that you could navigate through them. We quickly identified that we were looking for a learning management system for our digital classrooms that we're looking for, and we're also looking for a content management system to take care of all of our content. We initially thought Moodle, that seemed to be very popular in schools at that time in 2010, and so we started investigating that. Soon discovered that our multiple domain structure wasn't going to work very nicely. It worked with one domain only, and also we already knew the teachers and students in our school information system. We didn't want to have to re-enter that again in Moodle, which is the way that Moodle was wanting them to work. So we said, okay, we can't go that way. When we were looking at content management systems, as you can see, there was lots that we were comparing. SharePoint was the one that was leading, and then we actually thought that SharePoint could actually do that learning management solution as well. So we ended up coming back to just using SharePoint for both aspects. We then went and did a lot more research. We did engage a company to help us, and at this time we were partway through. We thought we had 6 months in which we had to develop the new intranet. We'd launched it at the beginning of 2011. The headmaster turned around and said, "Oh, these new iPads that have just been launched, I think they're really good. I want to give one to every Year 12 student and to all teachers of Year 12 staff." And we go, whoa. We hadn't seen the device, and then the iPad obviously is a completely different ecosystem and operates quite uniquely, and it'll come up again in Ben's presentation, some of the challenges that that provided for us. But we needed a way of getting content onto the device in an organised way, so through a proper intranet was going to be our solution for that. So that ramped up our development. We had to compress our time, and we had to deliver it for the beginning of term 4 instead of the next year. So we ended up having, I think it was about 12 meetings in about 8 days to analyse requirements from the headmaster who was involved right down to even junior school teachers, just to try and get a feel for what was required. And then we had to piece that together and try and work out what could be built in the first pass and then what would come in later implementations. We then presented some models. Ben will show you some models that we had early on in our just gathering what ideas do we have, and then you'll see it was paired back to actually what's reasonable and workable in the model. That's the first one. That was from our initial teacher discussion. What do you want to get to from the internet? And they basically had a brain dump of absolutely everything they were involved with. I'll hand back to Ben.
Excellent. So as you can see, most of the business functions, most of the requirements were all thrown at the requirements gathering team, and came up with a pretty busy slide, I think you'll agree, for the initial draft of what would be the teacher team site, or the teacher location for most of their day-to-day activities at the school. So I appreciate the text might be a bit small up the back there, but up the top we've got the variety of courses that the teacher may be involved in, the systems over in box number 2 there, for they may be able to use in their day-to-day activities, some of the links, some of the activities, calendar integration, and pretty well gives everything that we can possibly get into this internet. So a pretty common result if anyone's ever run a requirements gathering session. And then the project team's main job was to pair that back to a usable concept or a usable design that then followed into practice and made sure it was delivering on those goals. So one of those quite quickly was the courses up the top. The teacher in a standard role would be required to deliver much more than 5 classes. So therefore there was an initial, well, we can't really do that. How about we break it down, put a single courses link on the front page, and then we can have up to hundreds, if not thousands of courses if possible or if needed. So a good start and lots of good information for the project team to work through. As Evan mentioned, there's 3 main school groups at Trinity, from the little kiddies down at prep and kindergarten through to Year 6, through to the 7 to 10 and then the 11 to 12 junior and senior schools. And the idea behind this was a simplified design, this is what we think a 1-year-old or, sorry, Year 1 or a Year 4 person would be able to handle and be able to interact with and use as part of one of their systems at school. So a lot less content on it. As you see with the final product, the designs were simplified even further, and user experience was kept in mind to make sure that it would actually meet the requirements and be usable for someone of that age. Okay, so as we spoke about before, the requirement for SharePoint grew quite quickly from the initial CMS component through to providing some of those other features that Evan was starting to mention. So within the community or the infrastructure, so to speak, there's an information system or a school management database called Denby, which houses the classrooms, the timetables, the information for the students, the people who are going to attend the classes, and the day-to-day administrative details that are needed to run an education facility. So one of the requirements was to integrate with that product, and if you're from an education background, you may be using similar products like Synergetics or that sort of thing, and one of the challenges was to try and pull that information out, make it usable, make it searchable, make it information that we can actually surface and put onto the live page to give it some value. So as Evan mentioned also, the direction changed and the iPad requirement came out of left field, and it was well, hang on, that's going to change most of our initial timelines, project plans and development priorities. So we had to come up with a way to do that. So we put some solutions together, which I'll go through shortly, and released on the timeframes requested, and piloted to 5 of the faculties on that initial release in 2010. A few little improvements, a few little things over the Christmas period, and then rolled out to the remainder of the school in 2011. And this was the result of that first round of requirements gathering, wireframes, composition designs, and then releasing to the client for UAT, getting the different user audiences through the different schools to get in and basically pull it apart, break it, see whether it works, why does this do that, you know, and give us some feedback on it. And down the left-hand side, once again, the text is fairly small, but a lot of the day-to-day things that were on that initial wireframe you saw are represented on the quick launch, where, you know, if I need to find out what the code of conduct is, or an emergency plan, or a staff manual, something like that. Each of those are quickly representable by an icon that I can click on and go to. Up the top within the global nav were more of those functions across the school. So for example, if I went to the admin section, you would expect to find the admin documents, the forms, the leave apps, the PDFs, the Word documents that are a part of the natural administration process of an organisation. Collaboration team sites, I'm going to come back to those in a little bit more detail. I've got some more slides for you shortly. They obviously provided some solutions to some of those challenges that Evan was talking about previously. So quite a different mindset that we obviously evolved along the journey with as well, where we're coming in talking about collaboration and sharing of information, and we're meeting filing cabinets with a big padlock on them at the end of the day. So it took some adjusting, but the result was quite well received as a version 1, and it's continued its development and improvements since it was rolled out about 3.5 years ago. So within that homepage, as I was mentioning, some of those items across that global nav, the home and links, and they're just obviously links to other places, the admin documents for staff and students, standard curriculum or files or that sort of thing to run the organisation. The collaboration side of things was more around getting people to speak, getting people to talk, getting people to discuss something and enhance that learning journey. So for a student's perspective, it might be, let's put a file up, it's a group activity, get on that file, 3 or 4 people, co-author, collaborate, throw some ideas around and put together a better response to that evaluation item, whatever it may have been. It also took some extracurricular challenges for the school. For example, at the end of the year, there's 200 kids that have to design a jersey. And one likes this design, one likes that design. So how do we get that out? Your chess clubs, your Duke of Edinburgh competitions, those sort of things were all now had a home, and now it was, oh, if I need to get that, and I need to work with other people on it, we've actually got a location and a piece of software that can do it quite effectively. The team sites, So just to jump back one there, up on the global nav, the team sites were used as a master repository for all the curricular information. So as a teacher, over your 20-year career, you build up a lot of intellectual property and teaching methods and labs and things that you run, and the team sites became the storage or the master location for those pieces of information. So that each year when you're evaluating your curriculum, all right, what am I going to teach this year when I get Science 101? You can look at that material and say, yep, that really worked really well, that wasn't so good, this is some new learnings that's come about, and that was the master location for it all. So all lived in one spot. The next one after that was the virtual classroom. So this was one of the big things that I guess changed the game a little bit as far as Trinity is concerned, because it was the ability for now to have a digital location to run a class from. So no longer was it you have to be sitting in a class, you have to have 3 rows of chairs with 10 seats per row and sit and listen to an instructor teach. It was still obviously delivered in standard format, but now it opened up if you're sitting in the park at lunchtime and you've got wireless access, you can go and grab a document, you can look at something and you can submit work, you can talk with other people, you can fill out surveys, you can join a discussion forum, you can do all these other activities that in a traditional method, when you're sitting on a chair looking at a teacher, you may not have been able to do. So lots more information coming on the virtual classrooms. I'll pause there for a second. The next one was around the My Sites. So standard My Site for SharePoint 2010, 2013, whatever, but the way that we implemented it here was around some learning principles that Trinity and a lot of organisations do. So the first one, EOL, is evidence of learning, and the second one is goal setting and reflection. So in an academic year, when you rock up on day one, you start with, well, what am I going to learn this year? What's my challenge? And if I'm reading at a level 42 of English at the moment, I want to get to level 52 by the end, and that's a great challenge for a grade 2 child. So that the parent can then see that, right, this is where they started, this is where they're getting to, and the EOL is here's the books that they actually read along the journey, and they've actually got there. There's ticks in the boxes, and they've got a bit of evidence that can follow them along. So given that the virtual classrooms are year by year, they're obviously Science 101, here's a classroom for it. The second part of that with the My Sites, we wanted a way to have a continuing journey, so that if you do start in prep and you graduate in year 12, 13 years later, you can have a timeline of documents and things that follow your education journey. And if it's for the parents' benefit or the child or the teachers, whoever, but that My Site stays with them the entire journey of their education there. So each year, each of the things that they've achieved, the parent can obviously then see what's happening, see what sort of assessments, see a bit of spelling errors. Okay, we need to do some spelling with my child because they're struggling in that area. Or just enhance that learning experience. So the evidence of learning and goal setting and reflection, as we all do in certain parts of life, put a goal or a task out there, go and try and get it, and then reflect on how you did and what you can do better next time, and incorporate that into the child's learning. And then the other component was the parent portal. So the idea of the parent portal was we've now got staff and students working together to provide better digital education. Now let's bring the parents in. So if the parents can have a secure extranet login capability, HTTPS, username and password, bang, now they're actually involved directly with the school. No third-party education products, like a lot of the schools these days are trialling and putting solutions onto. Now it's just bang on. And remember back to your childhood days when you got a school report you might not have been very happy with, stayed in the bag for a day or two extra. Those days are gone. All right? It's now a single link. There's a nice big PDF there, semester 1 report, little Johnny Smith, download. And your parent will have it before you get home. So we're really trying to present and surface that information to parents to improve the learning experience for them as well, because they're obviously fostering and caring for that child and helping it go through the different stages of its education. So those points there are all summaries of what this obviously front page represents here. So there's a lot going on, even though it's a very simple design, it's clean, efficient, and represents colours well. It's obviously doing a lot of actual functional tasks for the school. Okay, so let's go down a little bit further detail on some of those points. So we introduced the Jersey competition, or the Jersey survey. This is the method or the site that's used to figure out what design the children are going to, sorry, not children in year 12, what the mature students are going to do as far as their design. So option 1, 2, 3 or 5, survey site, 25% say here, 50% say this one, this will be the winning jersey that you send it off to the printers. Everybody's got a chance to collaborate on it, and hopefully everyone enjoys that as a memory of their Year 12. So simple solution, there's not that much to that, but the business challenge that it solved created a fairly big improvement for that sort of thing. Previously it was whoever had the most numbers would get the best design, and then they'd get their approval, so to speak, and the more noise you made, the better jersey you got. So pretty straightforward. Now the virtual classrooms that I mentioned, this is where the action happens for the submission and the entry of documents and the collaboration of your students. So standard team site, nothing too crazy there, it's fairly straightforward. Now there's a lot of, obviously, things happening down the quick launch left-hand side here. I'll just paraphrase a couple. So assessments, study skills, textbooks, wikis, homeworks, class surveys. There's a whole heap of services we can now give to these students and in turn give it to the teacher to help the learning. So for example, the past assessments or exams or a Dropbox, we're going to come back to that one a little bit further. Those things allow a document to be put into a classroom, and it breaks the traditional walls of the classroom down to say that, go back to that sitting in the park at lunchtime, if you're that way inclined, get on and grab the document you were talking about, review the notes, throw a few social comments in there. The 2010 social feeds we used a little bit, and furthermore in 2013, but the basics of that collaboration was starting then, and the getting people working on the same page was starting. So the virtual classrooms, as you can imagine, there's just a couple of those for the 2,000 students and staff. At last count, we were just over 1,000 this year, and the virtual classrooms, there's a provisioning process we'll go through shortly, but they're all set up, automated, and it's, like Ben was saying in the room here an hour or two ago, we kept it as simple as possible. So everything's created out of the box, management overheads are minimised, and life cycle, deletions and distribution, that sort of thing is all handled, it's all managed. So that was the first look at the virtual classrooms. Now, the way that it worked, or the behind the scenes of the virtual classrooms, was once again getting the information out of that school database. A lot of the schools and education providers we've talked with have a central database that runs all of the learning activities of the school. And it may be on SQL, maybe on Access, maybe on FileMaker. There's a range of solutions out there. And our challenge was to talk to that and not have to either double log in or double query or try and search for something that's already there. It should already be presented, and if you can put a form up with a name on it, it should automatically figure out what the surname is in the person's or the student's year and the classes they're attending and what their report was for the year. So we really had to leverage a lot of that existing information. And the way we did it was effectively create a middle tier in the database schema. So we Denby out on the left, we had SharePoint out on the right, and we basically extracted, I think it was 6 tables worth of information and created a normalised database structure in SQL that was then our playground. We could do whatever we want with it. We were confident we would have no effect on the main administration project of the school, sorry, not project, the main administration product, and that data was then searchable. We could change things around, we could use it for maintenance scripts, we could do pretty whatever we want. So that database played a big part, and then we thought about what's the process to do 1,000 sites? What's the fastest way to do it? So PowerShell scripting, we looked at a couple of different options within the scripting side of things to go through and provision a team site based off a site template. Then look at the security side of things and who's going to get access to it, who's going to have read-only versus modify versus full control. Obviously we paired back the full control as most organisations do, and we looked at what sort of customisations, because when that team site was first built, we then said, well, this is version 1, ready to go. And of course, someone within the project team would say, well, really nice if we could put a web part here to show this type of information. It would be really nice. Yeah, all right, so let's do it again. So then re-provision, rerun the scripts, re-update the template, and then all of a sudden overnight or over a weekend, they're all re-provisioned prior to school starting and ready for usage by the students. As far as the maintenance scripts go, we also set up a couple of nightly 2 AM, 4 AM cleanups, additions, modifications, and additions, deletions. So if a new class started up, let's say there were too many enrolments in Science 101, and there now had to be a Science 101A and B, we would then obviously that'd pick up the changes in the AD groups. In the middle of the evening, it'd then say, right, I need to now create a new team site for that, virtual classroom, and then there'd be a location for that teacher to start teaching whenever that course kicked off. So lots of work behind the scenes there, and provisioning the script is double click, and then obviously just make sure all the site's provisioned correctly. So it's reasonably straightforward. All right, now Evan mentioned the iPad challenge, or the left fielder we got thrown halfway through. Now I think the culprit for this would have been Time Magazine, or one of those business exec ones that the CEOs always pick up on a plane. They go, yeah, iPads, they sound great, or Yammer, or whatever the new technology is. And it was exactly that. It was we've got a nice, good project plan of structured delivery, and bang, train out of left field, and all of a sudden we've got a third of the time, and we've got a lot more complexity, and we're going to try and figure out how to get content out of an iPad. iPads are fantastic for consuming content, when you want to read a site, when you want to read a web page, when you want to do an email or two, but taking content from that and putting it up to another resource is, it's getting better. There's a lot more applications out than there were in 2010, but we had to find a way, and we were structured around obviously looking at third-party apps, and we were also looking at whether we can do it out of the box. We're also a big believer of doing as much as you can out of the box and using the tool for what it's meant for. There's a lot of buttons and a lot of settings and a lot of little pieces of things you can turn on or off to make your life a lot easier. So we then looked at it and said, well, all right, how about we mail enable the classroom sites? So we set them up with a classroom number at .com, and we use email as a system to take content from a device and upload it to a classroom so that that person can submit some notes or some feedback or homework. So whether it be the basic, notepad type client on an iPad, draft up whatever you needed, click send, it'd then obviously pick up as an attachment, it'd hit the internal SMTP server of SharePoint, so yep, we can pass that through to the team site or the virtual classroom. And then we thought, well, hang on, how are we going to get around this ATT issue? So if you've sent an email before from an iPad, you're probably aware that it attaches this nasty little ATT001.html file. Now, we don't really want every single file that uploads to attach one of these in, so then we've got to think about a cleanup method. How do we get rid of this? So Content Organizer and Drop-Off Library, two other features within SharePoint. The Drop-Off Library, as the name suggests, is like a big box that you put your exam in when you finish your assignment, and then someone takes it away and does whatever. So in this case, we used it as a landing position or a landing spot so that when an attachment came in, it could then be applied some logic or some rules. And the Content Organizer was set up with two specific actions to say, action one, grab the attachment from the iPad and put it into the virtual classroom. Action number two, get rid of that HTML file that the iPad's created. And with no serious code whatsoever, with no third-party app, we were able to provide a solution that effectively any client that you could type some words into on an iPad, you can now contribute to a virtual classroom, which was a big win, zero cost, obviously a few hours to configure it all, and pretty straightforward. The Content Organizer, effectively tell it what your metrics are, and it'll do the job for you. So for example here, we said property-based condition for a file that begins with ATT0. Here's the rule, move it to a different site, aka the recycle bin. Cleaned it up and provided a nicer way to obviously get content in without having to go through the pipe. Alright, so we've got our virtual classrooms, we've got our day-to-day activities, we've got our collaboration site, we've got students working with other students to produce hopefully better assignments and exams. The next requirement we were presented with was around individual assessments or individual exams and requirements. So it's the Midcourt Exam, let's call it. It's three months of learning, and now there's an assessment to figure out what you've actually learned during that time. So the way we looked at this was to take the exam process, if you were doing an exam this afternoon, and try and replicate that as best as possible in SharePoint. So you fill out a piece of paper, you write your exam, CCC for your multiple choice, you put it in the box at the end, you walk away, you stress for a couple of days, and you find out your results the week after. We tried to map that across to say, well, okay, so if a student puts an electronic document into an electronic resource, they're naturally going to get a creator or an owner type permission. Therefore, they're going to see what's in that library and quite possibly see other people's assessments. So if I can go into the assessment library, pull out what I need, oh, it's not actually C's, it's actually B's. For this particular tick, change my answers, resubmit, 100%. So some of those standard SharePoint functionalities had to be broken and changed so that we could provide a secure and private facility to submit, obviously, a confidential document, which is obviously an exam. And then once that's all done, the teachers needed to have full control so they could obviously go in and mark the assessments. So we didn't give them full control, of course, follow best practice around permission assignment. Contribute was perfect. They can mark the document, the equivalent of the old red pen that you might have got from the teacher, and away we go. So the Dropbox, the classroom, as I was saying before, was the solution we did there. Now we did need a little bit of assistance here in the development side of things, so a little bit of code, and we wrote an event receiver. Right? Now, event receiver is a simple piece of code that, imagine a standard document library. If a certain action happens to that document library, then a certain event you can write to happen. So the two we've got here, where are they? Item created, item checked in. So if you put a document here, then there's a series of code that says go and do certain things. If you've put a document in and checked it in, then very similar process afterwards. Obviously go and update the content. So reasonably straightforward, it wasn't too much work. Obviously the devs got down and dirty in there and got that sorted, but gave us the ability to break what SharePoint usually does, give us a secure facility, and allow that submission of exams and assignments to occur quite easily. For those that are development orientated, there's some code that shows you, I know it's probably too small to read up the back, but all the slides for all the sessions during the conference are available, so it's about 90% of what's there, and it's pretty standard PowerShell commands to say, for example, item added, pull the properties out, and if an item's checked in, and so on and so forth. So reasonably straightforward, and give you an example of how it was sort of done. Okay, so the students and the staff have now got some big improvements in the way that they operate. And as I said before, we wanted to take that to the parents. The next step was give the parents a chance to contribute to the education and be involved in the journey. Some organisations are very parent involved, and you can effectively go to school with them and help them out 2 hours a week and be involved in that. Some of them are more hands-off, and here's your report every 3 months of how your child's progressing. So this approach obviously changes the passive. It makes it more active, makes it more involved. You can see things, you can react to things, and you can fix any issues that pop up in your child's education. So the parent portal, the student reports, as I said before. I'll show you a quick snapshot of that shortly. The homework and the announcements and those sort of things are also a lot more accessible. So, I know we're the fun police, but did you have any homework today, little Johnny? No, I didn't get any home. I just logged into your site, and here's a couple of reading assignments we need to do tonight. Oh yeah, I forgot about that. So there's that sort of thing that allows a lot more interaction, and the way that we set it up was the junior school, those prep kindy through year 6, there's a lot more involvement, a lot more interaction between the audiences, between the school and between the parents. And as the students mature through to senior school, that interaction is pared back a little bit, because obviously they're able to remember when they've got a note to take home, or they've got a question or an approval process at home to go through. So the evidence of learning, goal setting, reflection, once again, they can download those to see where they're travelling, how they're going to school, and we incorporated all of that through that database through Denby. So VCS and external content types to bring that information in structured format so we can manage it and obviously provide the functionality. So a fair bit of customisation around this portal, but it was one of the areas that really shows the parents that it's a progressive organisation that's trying to provide the best education and support services to the family, which is a fantastic thing. I have a couple of littlies myself, and the more information, the more you can obviously help out with the kids' education. Hopefully, the better they go. So that was great to see that happen. Now, as I said, the separate web application, we set it up as a totally separate entity, different URL, authentication, all that sort of stuff. So it is separate, but obviously has a lot of that same information. And on the roadmap, we've also got another web application planned for alumni. So The school has a tradition of people that once you've graduated, you stay involved in the school in somehow, whether it be as a grandfather going to see your young fella's first game of rugby or music recital or whatever activities they're in. And some of those sort of extracurricular activities we're going to try and manage through this process as well. So end up we'll have a four-part or four-stage portal where it'll have the different wings of the organisation and the community around that being able to have secure, authenticated access to pertinent information around the education experience, which is pretty cool. It's all running off the same hardware. It's all obviously a lot easier to manage. We haven't got each of those different products that you saw at the start. It's one product doing a multitude of different tasks in a streamlined and efficient manner. So there's the report card. Just a quick, very simple report of family by year by student. So 2014 there were 2 students, 2013 there were 3 students. I've scrubbed all the confidential information, and across the right hand side on the download button, obviously that's your PDF report, 1 to 2 meg in size, that has all of the teachers' comments and feedback from the year, or from the quarter, or from the session, depending on what have we got, semester 1, 2 and mid-semester reports. Okay, so that was I guess phase 1. I guess the best way to say it. We rolled out SharePoint. The project team implemented a lot of solutions, and it's had 18 to 24 months to mature and to work through some of the nuances of working in an education provider. And as we mentioned before, some of the corporate versus education things are quite different because kids are going to be kids, so you get a few things where they might be doing things you wouldn't expect a 35-year-old professional to do in a workplace. So, a few little things to get around, but the time ended up coming that we needed to start looking at 2013. The feature set, the hardware side of things, and the architecture. We said, well, let's have a look at it. Tevin and I had a chat mid-2013, and we said, well, let's pencil in the Christmas period. All the kids are away for 2 or 3 months. We've got this massive window, and let's get this thing upgraded. So we did exactly that, went through all the standard project phases, and once again, fairly small, but just quick summary, a couple of web front ends, a couple of OWAs, a couple of app servers, and an SQL box. Most of them are 2 CPUs, 4 CPU on the SQL server, and they're all between 24 and 12 gig of RAM. So they're appropriately resourced. That's running, if you take everything into account, about 4,500 people. So just for your scaling requirements, if you're looking at, or if you're working in this sort of size, that's about 4,500 people. Now, active users obviously isn't that high, but we do have a lot of kids using a lot of different files and a lot of content going back and forth on a standard school day. So it does get worked pretty hard. Alright, so the upgrade all went fairly smoothly, and as I said, we were lucky to have a nice window of time to do it. The next part of the upgrade for phase 2 was around the design side of things. So a lot changed in the landscape between 2010 and 2014, mainly due to the devices and the BYD principles that a lot of organisations are picking up these days. They're saying, look, we can't say you must use a Lenovo, whatever laptop, and that's it. People are bringing a multitude of phones, tablets, whatever's in. So basically, we sat down and said, well, what's the best way to address this? How can we provide a unique and flexible experience across these different devices, resolutions, and browsers? So from there, we engaged, obviously, again, and said, well, how's it going to look? What do you need? What's the branding we need to follow? And the standard design questions, obviously, that we worked through. And we came up with 1 or 2 solutions. Number 1 was build a specific solution for every device and every resolution, every browser. So computationally, I don't know how many that is, but it's a lot, and it's getting more every day. Or look at a responsive web design, or RWD. Now, for those of you that haven't experienced or seen a responsive web design, it's a fairly simple concept that one design can then work across multiple devices and resolutions. So, for example, the one at the back, if you grab the top left or bottom right side of the window and resize it, it will automatically cascade and rearrange the page to a format that will be acceptable for the device you're working on. So you can make it look like the tablet even though you're sitting on a PC. You can make it look like the phone even though you're sitting on a PC. And when you access it from a an Android device versus an iPad, it just goes, yep, no worries, I've got instructions within my CSS or within the Cascade style sheets to understand how to render this and produce it in a format that's going to be usable and acceptable to that device. Current sort of statistics, about 10% of most designs today are RWD. End of next year, they're saying about 40 to 45% of all designs created will be responsive and have an ability to just not care about what device it's accessed from and just present it in a format that's acceptable. So for this component, we went through our standard process. We drew up some stickman wireframes, black and white. This is what it's going to look like. This is where the layout and structure will happen. We, design team, then went and hit the Photoshop and came up with a series of composition designs to say, here's 4 different options, different layouts, photos here, colours there, menus and navigations changed around. It's a standard practice to show something graphically rather than develop and then have to redevelop. And down the bottom right hand side there, that was a draft mock-up. Some of that was obviously included, some of it wasn't. And the steering committee ended up approving, obviously, 1 of the 4. We hit it on the SharePoint side of things, created all the code, run it up, UAT'd it fairly heavily. We put it over to the client to test. They ran through a series of, obviously, browser and device checks, and we ended up with similar sort of styling, but behind the scenes a lot more user-friendly, and the user experience is a lot more efficient and easy to use for the different staff members. So consistent look and feel was part of the brief. Colours and branding was part of the brief, and even just the icons. They're a lot more friendly for touch-based navigation versus a mouse or click-based navigation. Little things like that make a big difference when you're on that different device. Not everyone's on a touch device, not everyone's on a PC, so you've got to remember that when you're designing this type of thing. Right, so that was the homepage. Just a couple of designs to finish off. There's one of the accordion schools, so that's the middle school. There's a few links in there to different tasks, different forms, different documents, those sort of things. There's an example of the design on a tablet. So you'll notice it's condensed and changed around a little bit as far as the layout goes. And there's an example on a phone. So you'll notice that the navigation across the top's disappeared. Right, there's no global nav anymore. It's now just a drop-down saying navigation, and each of those choices that you previously had are now just rolled into a specific drop-down. The vertical accordion that was on the right-hand side before is now swapped to obviously a horizontal, and same options there, so it's consistent no matter what device you're on. It makes sense, the colour codes are all the same, and user experience-wise was tested to be, oh, this is pretty straightforward, yeah, we can figure out this, I can find my way around. It's pretty similar to the old one, which in a way was an actual success, because it wasn't a, wow, this is too new, I don't want to touch it, I want to go back to the old one type result. So it was quite positive. Across the top, desktop tablet navigation, so just to confirm that last point I was saying, it's a bit bigger screen, and then down the bottom that phone navigation. So with the phone one specifically, you'll notice the search has now jumped underneath the navigation, and if there were web parts or data or whatever filling that component out, it would then continue down and find its new place in the phone. So slight little differences that you can program obviously into the CSS. Alright, the virtual classrooms also got a bit of a facelift as part of the redesign, and functionality is all still pretty similar, but just a few little improvements that were included as well. So one of the big ones was the social capabilities of SharePoint 2013. A lot more, we stayed out of the box, but a lot more collaboration and likes and feedback and announcements and those sort of things were introduced. On top of the obviously basic ones that came out in SharePoint 2010. Okay, so as we have alluded to in the presentations, a couple of slides to finish off. The road ahead involves extending that portal out to that fourth component and bringing the community, bringing the uncles, the aunties, the grandfathers, the people related to those students at school, and bringing them into that education experience so they can be a part of learning and the story from prep through to 12. Forms and workflow integration, bringing some of those older manual-based systems, bringing them up into obviously newer electronic formats, simplifying that, and then talking to that back-end data that I mentioned at the start of the session. The My Site Storage, we're looking at bouncing that out to the cloud and letting Microsoft worry about that now as part of OneDrive. And yeah, basically, I guess finishing off some of those nice to-dos. We've taken the approach of start small, look at what we can realistically achieve, tick those boxes, then move on to the next ones. Don't try and take on too much too early. Okay, so last slide, Evan, if I can get you to come up just to finish off. Some lessons learned, reflection, any pieces of advice you can offer the audience to help out with some sort of project?
Yeah, I guess initially some of the project team had grand visions as to what we'd be able to achieve, and they obviously were too big a dream for a school with our resources to achieve. But start small and build up slowly, get some wins, find the champions that are enthusiastic and encourage them and get them to talk to their peers, and that actually has been helped uptake greatly through the teachers by not getting it told to them by an IT person or someone seen as IT, but by a colleague that's actually doing it as well. Collaboration, it's amazing. You know, at the beginning of our journey, collaboration was a dirty word for some teachers and they didn't share. But now they actually are wanting to share, and the team sites are growing and they're being used as we wanted them to. So that's been a great win for us. Yeah, you need to take everyone with you. That's the other thing is initially we tried to make sure we covered all groups, and we tried to keep them engaged all the way through so that they know that we are considering them and their viewpoint and building this solution for them as well.
Okay guys, your turn. Any questions, anything we can assist with? What we did well, what we did wrong, what we can learn from, anything we can assist with?
Did you leverage audiences for some of that? And what kind of workflows did you use?
The audiences were leveraged for some of the security group authentication so that we could differentiate between the different audiences through the virtual classrooms. So how do we know whether they go in that classroom? You got it right there.
And the workflows, were they in-house or did you get a third party?
All in-house at the moment. There's no third-party workflow products on. Basic, I would classify the workflows at the moment, and as we showed, there's plans there for a lot more advancement in the workflow side of things.
Thank you.
With 2,000 students, 500 teachers, and many thousands of parents, you have about different level of experience and ability to come through. How do you get around that? Because obviously some will say you can have some people who will say, oh, I can't just send me it before, can't just put it in mail to you. Did you have any resistance like that?
Yes, there were some parents that did find it very difficult to use the username and password that was emailed to them, sent to them on a letter, told to them over the phone, to actually key it in and click the download button. So there were some initially that said, can't you just send it to me? But I guess I left it up to the masters of that section of the school to whether they did that or not. But these days, I don't think they are sending any out. So it has taken some time. There are a lot of issues with when they're accessing it from home computers. I remember spending a lot of time with a family until I worked out that they had some filtering software on their home computer that actually was preventing access to TNet. So, because I sent her, I said, can you go next door and try it there? And she came back and said, yeah, it works perfectly there. I said, so what's different on your computer? And then we got down to, oh yeah, we run this software to stop kids doing things on the internet. And so it's hard to control the other devices. That's why we are trying to get a solution that will cater for whatever they're accessing it from.
A nice standard SOE would be good, where every desktop was exactly the same. We could control that, but when you add the external community we were talking about, it's impossible to then dictate terms of what type of hardware request you do on your own house.
Then if you were starting this again tomorrow from scratch, so day one in the project, would you consider going to the cloud from day one, or do you still do on-premise? Reasons for your answer.
Great question. We would definitely consider it, but the interaction with the school management database would be one serious concern I'd have as to the interaction ability we would have in the cloud. So if we could get around some of those challenges, I'd consider it. We're at the stage now of looking at what's possible as a proof of concept in the cloud, maybe look at 10-20% of the solution you've seen, and then maybe in time it'll head that way. At the moment, because we were working with an unknown database that has critical school information in there, yeah, we could probably do it now, but 2010 it's definitely not possible.
Just curious about the next stages of opening up the parent portal to the extended family, how you're planning to approach the permissions and how they are given access and credentials.
Yeah, just the question there was about extended family permissions assignment. It's going to be a challenge, good question, because the corporate environment, someone needs permission to this, you give them read or contribute permission, done. In a family structure, given today's family isn't the standard mum, dad and 2 kids, there's a lot of variables that certain parts of the family will have custody of the child. There may be 3 parents involved, there might be no parents involved, and therefore you've got grandparents. So it's something that we've sort of half tackled with the parents. So we'll use the same sort of approach to engage with the extended community, and then obviously look at the best way through PowerShell and audiences and group targeting to say.
How many parent credentials do you issue at the moment? Is it just one or multiples currently?
At the moment, we have one login for a family, and that's based on essentially on our other core admin system, which has one family code. But within each family, you can have up to 4 different parents that want to be involved. And so it depends, as Ben said, as we get to some of the other material that we want to deliver that way, it will get a lot more complicated. I guess we've tied it in tightly with AD, and so everything is traceable, and the permissions that they're granted does limit what they can do. And if they do share their password, as some kids will want to do, even though they're told not to, there's not a significant amount of damage that can be done. The further through schooling they get, the more critical and less amenable they are to share their password, because if someone gets in and deletes some of their work, then they've got no argument really against that. Everything is backed up though, so we do help them that way as well.
And I guess the digital side of things, if you do something on a product, you've now got audit logs and traces and IP addresses, and you can go back and say that person logged in with that credential, and you can prove it a little bit versus 30-40 years ago if someone scribbled something on the toilet wall. It was just whatever it was. So, and there's been a few small situations where we've had to pull out the audit logs, and we've had to have some discussions with kids to say, well, not really the best way to approach it, please don't put that material in that place next time.
One example of that is we have an anonymous class survey which they do at the end of every semester, and to all intents and purposes, students and teachers is anonymous, but there was a response that I was asked to investigate, and so we did have to dive into the logs and actually track down which device it was done on and when it was done, and then find the student that was there. It was actually the person sitting next to him that leant over and typed on his device inappropriate comments. So a little bit of investigative work was required, but typically we manage it as best we can.
So it wasn't really anonymous, was it?
I think it's anonymous, but we've got obviously the standard tools at our disposal. So, and a few little case studies like that gets around school quick enough to say that, okay, if you do something you shouldn't, they're obviously going to be able to find it out. Okay guys, that's about time for us. Thank you very much for your attendance today. If you've got any other questions, you're more than happy to address them. Evan and I will be here for a few more minutes packing up, and then down in the speaker's corner, the far end of the conference, level 3. And thanks for your attendance. Enjoy the rest of the conference.